When a couple marries, they begin a journey that is meant to be about love, trust, and the building of a shared life. A honeymoon is often the first great symbol of this journey, a time to celebrate union, to find quiet moments of intimacy away from the world, and to dream together about the future. For most couples, it is remembered forever as a stretch of days painted in joy. For Isabella Hellman, however, the very word honeymoon would become inseparably tied to mystery, suspicion, and ultimately tragedy. Isabella was born in Cuba and later built her life in South Florida in Delray Beach. Those who knew her described a woman who radiated warmth and determination. She was a real estate broker, hardworking and dedicated, someone who had carved out a career through resilience. At 41 years old, she was also a devoted mother to her young daughter, who had quickly become the center of her universe. To Isabella's friends and family, she was not only a professional woman of strong character, but also a lively presence, social, vibrant, and open-hearted. She loved the ocean, she loved adventure, and she wanted to give her child a future filled with stability and love. It was in this world of personal and professional ambition that Isabella met Lewis Bennett. Bennett was a dual citizen, born in Britain but also holding Australian nationality. He worked in the maritime field and presented himself as someone knowledgeable about boats, sailing, and the life of the sea. To an outsider, he seemed confident, worldly, and self-assured, the kind of man who could offer excitement as well as security. Their relationship, like many others, was a mixture of attraction and cultural blending. A Cuban-American woman and a British-Australian man planning a life together under the Florida sun. But behind the curtain of appearances, things were not always smooth. Friends of Isabella would later recall moments of unease, hints that Lewis could be controlling, temperamental, sometimes cold. Isabella, a woman who valued family bonds deeply, often confided in her loved ones through text messages that she felt tension in the marriage. She worried about his moods, his flashes of anger. Still, she pressed forward, perhaps because she hoped things would improve, perhaps because she was committed to keeping her family intact, or perhaps simply because she believed that love deserved patience. In April 2017, Isabella and Lewis married. It was supposed to be the start of a stronger chapter, a uniting of paths for themselves and their child. For the honeymoon, Lewis proposed something different from the typical sandy resorts or European cities. Instead, he planned a sailing trip across the Caribbean aboard a catamaran. It sounded adventurous, romantic, and perfectly suited to his maritime background. For Isabella, who enjoyed the ocean and warm winds, it promised an unforgettable experience. By mid-May, they were already at sea, moving along the Caribbean waters. Their vessel was the Surf into Summer, a 40-foot catamaran. It was sturdy enough for extended travel and large enough to carry supplies for days. The journey was meant to combine leisure with a touch of exploration, a chance for them to escape the routines of land life and find time together. But for Isabella, the days at sea may also have carried a quieter undercurrent of unease. On May 14, 2017, the couple left Puerto Rico and began making their way toward Florida with the plan to sail north past Cuba and eventually home. For many, that stretch of sea represents romance. Endless horizons, turquoise waves, the wind filling the sails. For Isabella, it would be the last horizon she ever saw. The following day, on May 15, the U.S. Coast Guard received a distress call. Lewis Bennett's voice was on the radio, urgent but oddly measured. He reported that his vessel had suffered a sudden catastrophe. He claimed that while he had been asleep in his cabin, he was awakened by a loud thud, and when he rushed up to inspect, he found the catamaran taking on water rapidly. The boat, he said, was sinking, and more terrifyingly, his wife Isabella was gone. He did not know where she was. Bennett abandoned the catamaran and moved into the life raft. He brought with him not only basic supplies, but a collection of personal items, luggage, bags of possessions, food, navigational tools, flares, and even a stash of rare coins that he later admitted were worth tens of thousands of dollars. To the Coast Guard, the scene they later encountered raised troubling questions. Why had this man, in the midst of a supposed emergency, made sure to save valuables and personal property so carefully, yet made no attempt to rescue his wife? Why had he prioritized possessions over a living, breathing person? When rescuers arrived, they found Bennett safe in the raft, surrounded by the items he had saved. But Isabella was gone. Vanished into the Caribbean night, her body was never recovered. At first, the Coast Guard treated the incident as a maritime tragedy. Boats sink, accidents happen, the sea is unforgiving. But as investigators pieced together the details, doubts began to surface. For one, the damage to the catamaran did not align perfectly with Bennett's account. And then there were the questions about timing. Bennett had waited some 45 minutes before radioing for help. In an emergency, that seemed strange. Why delay? What was he doing in those precious minutes? Even more disturbing were the records from Isabella's phone and digital communications. In the weeks before her disappearance, she had confided in friends about her marital struggles. She described arguments, her fears about Bennett's temper, her unease at sea with him. These messages painted a picture not of a blissful newlywed, but of a woman worried about her safety and her marriage. Family members were horrified when they learned the news. To them, Isabella was not the type to vanish or act recklessly at sea. She was cautious, grounded, and above all, a loving mother. They could not believe she had simply slipped away in the night. Their suspicions quickly turned toward Bennett. Was this really an accident, or had the honeymoon voyage been the stage for something darker? Meanwhile, investigators took note of another critical fact: financial motive. Bennett, they discovered, stood to gain control of Isabella's assets if she were declared dead. That included her Florida home, which she had owned before marriage, as well as her potential estate. The prospect of wealth and freedom from a strained marriage gave prosecutors a potential motive: money and escape. By late summer, the case had transformed from a maritime accident inquiry into a potential homicide investigation. Forensic experts examined the wreckage of the surf into summer, analyzing whether its sinking had been deliberate. Prosecutors began building a theory that Bennett had intentionally sabotaged the vessel, staged the sinking, and made sure his wife was gone, all while ensuring his possessions were safe. For Isabella's family, the pain was unbearable. Not only had they lost a daughter and sister under mysterious circumstances, but they were forced to reckon with the horrifying possibility that the man she had married had orchestrated her death. They also had to think of her young daughter, who was suddenly left without a mother and perhaps with a father accused of unthinkable betrayal. The story gripped the media. Headlines painted Isabella as the vibrant mother who vanished at sea, and Bennett as the calm, collected husband whose behavior seemed too composed, too practical in the wake of his wife's disappearance. For true crime observers, the case represented a chilling archetype. The honeymoon gone wrong, the romantic trip turned into a fatal stage, love collapsing into murder. As the months passed, Bennett maintained his innocence. He insisted that Isabella's death had been a tragic accident, that he had tried to save her, that he could not explain what happened in those crucial moments. Yet his actions, the saving of coins, the delay in calling for help, the carefully packed bags, refused to fit into his narrative. When federal prosecutors finally charged him, it became clear that the story of Isabella Hellman was not going to be remembered as a tragic accident at sea. It would be remembered as a true crime tale of suspicion, betrayal, and unanswered questions. By the time the case moved toward court, the honeymoon that should have marked the happiest days of Isabella's life had instead become the last chapter she would ever live. And for Louis Bennett, the man she trusted to share her future, the journey was only beginning, into investigations, indictments, and the long shadow of suspicion. The disappearance of Isabella Hellman on that dark May night in 2017 might have ended as just another maritime tragedy. One more story of how quickly the sea can swallow lives without warning. But the details surrounding the event refused to fit neatly into the framework of an accident. From the beginning, investigators sensed something was off. The husband's story was too controlled, too convenient, and the evidence left behind seemed a whisper of design rather than disaster. When the U.S. Coast Guard responded to Louis Bennett's distress call, they found him safe in a life raft, surrounded not by the frantic chaos of a man who had just lost his wife, but by neatly packed belongings. He had carried aboard the raft bags of possessions, clothing, food supplies, flares, navigational equipment, and most strikingly, a pouch containing rare silver coins, collectibles later valued at nearly $100,000. These coins would become a haunting symbol of the case. In the moments when his wife was vanishing into the ocean, Bennett had made sure to secure his valuables. To investigators, this detail alone was suspicious. A person in genuine shock, forced into a life raft by a sudden catastrophe, usually thinks of survival above all else. Why had Bennett calmly salvaged luggage and coins, yet failed to raise an alarm for his wife? Why was Isabella not his first priority? His account of events, awakened by a loud thud, discovering water rushing in, then realizing his wife was missing, sounded thin, lacking the frantic detail of real memory. It was as though he were reciting a script. As the Coast Guard studied the partially submerged catamaran, they noticed signs inconsistent with Bennett's explanation. The vessel showed evidence of deliberate openings in the hull, almost as if someone had sabotaged it from within. Pumps and hatches bore marks, suggesting intentional tampering. Rather than a sudden natural accident, the boat looked to have been sunk. These suspicions were strengthened by Bennett's delay in contacting authorities. Records revealed he had waited approximately 45 minutes after supposedly discovering his wife missing before he made a distress call. In a genuine emergency, especially if a loved one has disappeared, every second counts. That gap in time raised questions. What was he doing during those 3/4 of an hour? Was he staging the scene? Was he ensuring the valuables were secured? Or was he waiting to make sure Isabella would not resurface? The Coast Guard handed its findings to the FBI, and soon a federal case began to take shape. Investigators pulled phone records, emails, and text messages, searching for clues to the marriage itself. What they discovered was a chilling pattern of conflict and fear. In the months leading up to the trip, Isabella had confided in friends and family about her struggles with Bennett. Texts revealed her growing unease. She described his controlling behavior, his temper, and the way he dismissed her concerns. On one occasion, she texted that she was tired of his anger. On another, she expressed fear that she was being pushed aside in decisions about their future. She loved her daughter fiercely, and that child was her anchor, but she admitted privately that her relationship with Bennett was far from harmonious. To Isabella's family, these revelations were devastating, but not surprising. They had sensed tension between the couple. They knew Isabella valued family above everything, and the idea of separation would have pained her. But they also knew she would never have willingly disappeared from her daughter's life. For them, her sudden vanishing in the night was unthinkable as an accident. They became convinced she had been silenced. As the FBI built its case, prosecutors began to outline a possible motive. Bennett, they argued, faced financial pressures. Though he presented himself as a professional with maritime expertise, his career had been unstable. Isabella, by contrast, had built a solid foundation in Florida. She owned a condominium, had steady income, and was the legal owner of property that Bennett could not access unless she were gone. If Isabella died, Bennett stood to benefit from her estate, her property, and the elimination of what prosecutors called marital difficulties. The theory that emerged was grim, that Bennett had planned to rid himself of his wife during the sailing trip. By scuttling the boat and ensuring Isabella did not survive, he could present the story as a maritime tragedy, return to Florida, and begin a new chapter unencumbered. The careful salvaging of possessions, including the rare coins, fit neatly into this theory. Bennett had prepared for survival, but not for rescue. The public, watching through the lens of media coverage, was fascinated and horrified. Headlines branded the case as the honeymoon murder at sea. To many, the details evoked classic true crime themes: betrayal disguised as love, the sea as both setting and accomplice, and the eerie image of a man drifting safely in a raft while his wife vanished into the deep. In December 2017, Bennett was arrested. He was initially charged not only with involuntary manslaughter, but also with smuggling the rare coins, which had been stolen years earlier from a yacht in St. Martin. That revelation added another layer of criminality to his character. The man who had presented himself as a maritime professional now looked like a fraudster as well as a possible killer. Court documents revealed that prosecutors were prepared to argue for second-degree murder, but the case was complicated by the absence of a body. Isabella's remains had never been found, and proving the exact mechanism of her death would be challenging. Without a body, defense attorneys could argue endlessly, That she might have fallen overboard by accident, or that she was lost in chaos while Bennett tried to save himself. The lack of physical evidence meant prosecutors had to rely heavily on circumstantial details: the boat's suspicious damage, Bennett's behavior, and the digital record of marital strife. Still, the weight of those details was powerful. The image of a man protecting his coins but losing his wife was hard to overcome. The text messages from Isabella spoke in her own voice about her fears. The timeline of events suggested deliberate action rather than accident. Together, these fragments formed a compelling mosaic. As the case developed, the courtroom became a stage for two competing narratives. The prosecution's story was one of greed, calculation, and betrayal. A husband who decided that freedom and wealth were worth more than the life of his wife. The defense, on the other hand, clung to the unpredictability of the sea. They insisted that accidents happen, that Bennett had done what he could, that Isabella's loss was a tragedy but not a crime. Family members attended hearings, their grief visible. Isabella's relatives made emotional statements about her character, her devotion to her child, and their conviction that she had been wronged. For them, the case was not about legal arguments, but about justice for a woman who deserved truth. In 2018, facing mounting evidence, Bennett chose to plead guilty, not to murder, but to involuntary manslaughter. It was a legal compromise. By admitting responsibility for causing Isabella's death without intent to kill, he avoided the risk of a harsher sentence that might have come from a murder conviction. For Isabella's family, the plea was bittersweet. It acknowledged guilt, but in a diminished form. To them, the crime had been deliberate. To the court, it was framed as negligence at sea. During the sentencing phase, prosecutors pressed for a lengthy term, emphasizing Bennett's cold calculation and the irreversible harm caused. The defense argued for leniency, portraying him as a man caught in circumstances beyond his control. In the end, Bennett received a 22-year prison sentence. He would serve time in federal custody, his life forever altered by the choices he had made. For Isabella's family, however, justice felt incomplete. There was no closure without a body. There were no final answers about what exactly had happened on that boat in those crucial moments. They were left with fragments, suspicions, and the haunting image of Isabella lost in the waves. The case highlighted not only the fragility of human relationships, but also the ways in which the sea, vast and unforgiving, can become both a setting and an accomplice to crime. It raised chilling questions about trust within marriage, about the lengths to which people will go for money or freedom, and about the haunting silence left when a victim's voice is lost forever. As the verdict was read and Bennett was led away, the courtroom atmosphere was heavy with both relief and sorrow. Relief that some measure of accountability had been delivered. Sorrow that the life of a vibrant woman had been reduced to court transcripts, evidence files, and unanswered questions. For the world outside, the story of Isabella Hellman became one more entry in the annals of true crime. The honeymoon that turned into a crime scene, the marriage that ended in betrayal, the sea that kept its secrets. The courtroom became the final stage of a story that had begun in the still waters off Florida and stretched across years of unanswered questions. When Louis Bennett appeared before the judge, the air was heavy with the weight of a family's grief and a prosecution determined to prove what had really happened on that honeymoon night. Isabella's parents and relatives sat silently, listening as her life was dissected into exhibits, arguments, and legal strategies. Every word spoken about her was painful, her warmth reduced to evidence, her absence treated like a problem that needed solving. Prosecutors pressed their case with steady force. They spoke of a husband who packed coins and documents into a life raft, but did not fight to save his wife. They read Isabella's own words aloud, messages in which she had expressed fear and unease about the man she had married. They pointed to the improbability of a seasoned sailor like Bennett losing control of the boat so completely while his partner simply vanished without a trace. The holes in his story became the backbone of their narrative, each inconsistency painted as proof of malice. Bennett's lawyers fought to turn the tide. They claimed the sea itself was responsible, that an unseen collision with debris had opened the hull and turned a pleasant voyage into chaos. They reminded the court that accidents at sea are common, that panic can overwhelm even the most capable person in the dark of night. To them, Isabella had been a victim of tragedy, not murder, and Bennett had been a husband caught in the storm rather than its cause. The trial never reached its climax before a jury. Faced with the possibility of being convicted of second-degree murder, Bennett accepted a plea deal. He admitted guilt to a reduced charge of involuntary manslaughter, acknowledging that his negligence had caused Isabella's death. For her family, it was not the outcome they had dreamed of. They had wanted a declaration of murder, an acknowledgement of intent. Instead, they were given a compromise, one that ensured punishment, but left room for doubt about motive. When the sentence was handed down, Bennett received 8 years in federal prison, followed by deportation to his native England once his time was served. In the sterile language of the court, justice had been delivered. But for those who loved Isabella, no words and no years could repair the void she left behind. Her daughter, just a toddler when she lost her mother, would grow up carrying only fragments, stories told by grandparents, photos, and the ache of absence where memory should have been. In the end, the story of Isabella Hellman was less about the legal conclusion than about the chilling transformation of a dream into a nightmare. A honeymoon voyage meant to begin a lifetime together instead became the last chapter of her life. The water took her, but it was human choice and human betrayal